It's really like, you're just like, hey, what if we just did this like show where we kind of did a kind of a Lectio Divina on the Gospels? Well, actually, like, there's a lot of that. And of course, that's not to say there can't be legitimate criticisms of artwork.
I don't really care for that take. I'm 100% fine with people being critical of the show. And I'm also, if I think that something's well done, I will defend it to those people. So Jonathan Roumie went on the podcast Pints with Aquinas, and he had a few things to say in the middle of the podcast about the criticism that The Chosen show receives. All right. And it's kind of an interesting take. There's like a lot of attempts that I've heard, like Dallas Jenkins, the creator of The Chosen show, give in regards to the backlash that the show receives. And so this is actually, I think, the first time Jonathan Roumie, at least that I know of, has addressed, right, this issue of a certain group of believers, maybe some unbelievers, are very critical of The Chosen show and how they go about telling a story of the life of the followers of Jesus, and Jesus being a character in the show. So let's start, and we'll go through this, react to it, break it down. Let's get into this.
First time I heard about The Chosen, I was upstairs doing something, and we have a TV in our basement, and I think one of the kids came up and said, we're watching this new show about Jesus, like it's a new series or something. And you're like, and I think my eyes rolled. Yeah, my eyes rolled because we all know the experience of watching a religious movie, and you're like, oh dear. I am not just saying this to be nice to you.
Truly I say to thee.
Yeah, that's so relatable, honestly. Like I've been in part of, not only have I watched Christian films, I've been a part of some of them. And they're usually created by people who don't understand filmmaking. And I've had to observe and be in the middle of just a mess when it comes to a lack of knowledge around filmmaking. But it also always comes out super corny and cheesy. And so, yeah, that's relatable. And that's one thing that I really love about The Chosen show is it's very tolerable and actually enjoyable. And I think that just goes to show with the quality of the writing to make it engaging and telling a good story. Dallas Jenkins, his father, can't remember his first name, but he's the guy who wrote the Left Behind series. His father's like a really famous Christian novelist. So I think Dallas grew up in a household that knew how to tell stories. And so The Chosen is actually an engaging Christian series. Also, it's kind of like one of the only big Christian series. Everything else that's Christian is like movies and whatnot. So let's keep going.
Totally. Yeah. Not just saying this to be nice to you, but when you walked on set as Jesus, it just made sense. It wasn't jarring. It wasn't like, well, this is weird, I gotta get used to it. It was like, wow, that's amazing. And it's way more, it's way more than just your hair and beard, clearly, you know.
It's also, I mean, thank you so much. That first scene is in a bar. Okay. And Jesus walks into a bar where Mary Magdalene is drowning her sorrows and on the verge of committing suicide in our story. You know, we take some creative license. It's based on the Gospels.
Yeah, that's actually, I'll be honest, that is the scene that I feel like almost everybody who watched the first episode was sold on the show. If you watched The Chosen season 1 and you made it to the end of episode 1, I was kind of skeptical the whole time. I was like, is this going to be cheesy? Is this worth me investing time in? Do I feel like it's being done well? And when I saw that scene, I was completely hooked. My interest was beyond piqued. I was in, man. I was like, all right, I'm watching the entire season. Let's see how this plays out. The ending of episode 1 in season 1 really does get you. And I don't think it's necessarily Jonathan Roumie, but it has to do with the writing, the storytelling, and then the performance after that, right? And the setup, like he was saying, the setting of the characters. It wasn't trying to paint these biblical characters with like Christian, lens brushes, I guess. It was literally making it gritty. Like there's suicide involved, there's bars involved, there's drunkenness involved, and there's even demon possession involved, right? It is dark. And yeah, I was hooked. After that.
It's not meant to replace the Gospels. Let's just relax in our story. We take some creative license. It's based on the Gospels. It's not meant to replace the Gospels. Let's just relax.
Everyone. I was going to ask you about this because there's a lot. We live in such a divisive time. Everything's being pulled apart. Like the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the conservatives in America, the Catholic Church, the Jewish community. Like it feels like everything's being sifted as wheat.
Yeah.
And
well, I definitely agree with that. I do think, as I was saying earlier, the internet is a is a place where this happens. And I think it's a good thing being sifted through. And so I think discourse is actually really good because it allows us to actually, as he said, sift through and create something that's actually good and have a collective opinion that's been well thought out and well debated. However, in fact, I think it brings to light what is good and bad. So, an example, the Rings of Power is just a bad show. The Acolyte is just a bad show. And if we didn't have the internet, you'd probably just be there thinking it by yourself, but there wouldn't be this discourse on it. And so, yeah, it's not really divisive. It sort of is, but if you choose not to engage with the divisiveness and just have an opinion and put your opinion out there in YouTube comments and in YouTube videos, then it creates more to the conversation that is ultimately productive. That's what I say. And so even with The Chosen, I think it's also productive.
It's really like, you're just like, hey, what if we just did this like show where we kind of did a kind of a Lectio Divina on the Gospels? Well, actually, like, there's a lot of that. And of course, that's not to say there can't be legitimate criticisms of artwork.
That's the thing. I don't really care for that take. I'm 100% fine with people being critical of the show. And I'm also, if I think that something's well done, I will defend it to those people in the same way that I'm the guy who's pushing up his glasses, right, when it comes to Rings of Power, because I know I'm a big fan of Tolkien. I know a lot about what's actually correct, and I think it's garbage. So yeah, I think that's actually a good thing. He's framing it as sort of a negative thing, but I differ with him there.
Obviously, we're not saying that, but it's how have you dealt with that? How's Dallas dealt with that?
He's pretty remarkable in that there's.
If you guys don't know who Dallas is, Dallas Jenkins is the creator of the show, right? He's the guy who writes it, directs it. He's co-producing it. So
not much that sticks with him. He just kind of, bounces off of him, and he's like, yeah, whatever. Like he already knows what it's going to be, what the criticisms will be before we even shoot the scene. I feel like there are times where I'm like, this is going to get a rise out of people, but I get it. I'm like, this is, and we've had actually discussions about like, okay, well.
That's an interesting idea, is like the automatic nature in your mind of when they're filming something, this is going to get a rise out of people. So when I look at the show, I guess there's been like 1, 2, maybe 3 times where I was like, yeah, this is going to get a rise out of people, or like people aren't going to care for this. But honestly, a lot of the divisive like criticism the show's received, I was surprised by it. I know there was the whole thing in season 3, I believe, where Jesus says, I am the law of Moses, right? And maybe it was season 4. Yeah, I think it was season 3. And that apparently is, a lot of people were saying they're taking it out of the Book of Mormon. That ended up not being true, right? But there's just also like a lot of false narratives. I think people tend to hate on the show, specifically this show, because not because it's not good. It actually is really good. It actually is really engaging because the focus is human, right? The focus is on the human experience and how would real humans interact with God himself coming to earth and becoming human and steering humanity in the right direction and saying things that no humans ever heard before. That is a very interesting concept, and it's actually very well done. I believe it's very well written. You could disagree there, but I think it's very engaging. I have no problem with it. There's a few small criticisms that I bring up, but there's nothing major. Now, with that, I am surprised by some of the things that people online latch onto. Again, I think that's a good thing because then we have the ability to counter it if it's actually false or it's actually just kind of a trash opinion, right? I think it kind of boils down to people just don't want a show about Jesus being made at all. I think anything that's putting Jesus on screen being represented by a human, I think that makes people uncomfortable. It makes some people uncomfortable. And so I think there's just some people that just don't want to see any movie, show, or any kind of depiction of Jesus if it involves an actor to play Jesus. I think that's the broad idea of why it receives criticism, is people with that mindset that just get upset about the idea of a show about Jesus, right?
well, how do we best approach this scene? Because you and I both know that this is going to read one way to some people and another way to other people. And like, how do we just keep this continually universally ecumenical, where we're not planting a flag one place or another? Because that's been, for me, in my observations, that's been the reason for the success of the show. It's because it is so universal. It is so beloved because of how it's not denominationally specific. It's story specific. It's Jesus specific. It's Jesus centric. It's meant to get you to think about the reality of Jesus' life on earth and what he did that was both human and divine in the course of his life and ministry.
That's a really good point. The point of the show is to get you to think about the life of Jesus, his divinity, and what he means for humanity and the world, right? And that's why the focus of the show is on the disciples, is on the followers of Jesus and the people that were around Jesus or interacted with Jesus, whether they are in the Bible or whether they're not in the Bible or really elaborated on in the Bible. Like the one character of Gaius, where he's been in season 1 and he's been observing and around Jesus for multiple seasons. And then in season 4, we get who he is in the Bible. Like they reveal what character he actually is, who does show up in the Bible. But it doesn't say in the Bible that he was around that whole time, right? So they take some creative liberties, but they don't contradict the events that actually happen in the Bible or the intention of the teachings of Jesus. I think that's the big difference. That's my standard when I approach a show or a movie, if there's source material. And when it comes to the Bible, that's some pretty heavy source material, to say it lightly. I would say, does it contradict, and is it used as the foundation of the show to build on? Or are you building your own show and your own story and then inserting established source material in as Easter eggs or in as, member berries or in as like point motivators, but it's not the foundation of what you're building on? The timeline of events for The Chosen is the foundation from the Bible, and they're not contradicting scripture. The point he makes about multi-denominational, they're staying away in the show from claiming a denomination. I know Jonathan Roumie and a couple characters are Catholic. I know that Dallas Jenkins is Protestant. I know they have a couple of Jewish individuals who help with writing the show, and that's why they get into the deep details of Jewish culture in the show. There's a lot of diversity of opinions, but the goal is that they all want to tell a story about Jesus that's respectful. I also believe there are some people working on the show, even as actors, that aren't necessarily Christians. I could be wrong about this. Not all of them have been super upfront about that, but at least in season 1 and season 2, there's already been a couple that have come out and said, like, I didn't really have a really strong faith in my life, or I didn't have any faith and I came to faith working on the show. So yeah, it's interesting that when you don't pick a side, it kind of creates unity, huh? When you don't pick a side. But there's some people that feel like they pick sides. There are people still trying to convince everyone that this is a show made by Mormons, when the guys who are writing it, there's no Mormons writing the show, right? It's just, it got its initial funding from Angel Studios, who the company's owned by Mormon guys, but and get people talking. And hopefully, if you've never met Jesus, if you don't know who Jesus is, if you've never opened the Bible, this is meant to gauge your interest and provoke interest in knowing more about these people, about this movement. We describe the show now as a historical drama, because that's what it is. It's a historical drama about these people at this time, and this man and our God in this movement. If you don't accept that he's God, that's your journey. But we're presenting it as this is what this story is. And if it strikes something beyond just that of a narrative, television show, glory to God. Like that's the I think the end goal for many of us working on the show who are believers, who love Jesus and see him as more than just a person who, roamed the earth for a few years and taught some things and had some maxims that stuck around beyond his lifetime. That's very interesting. I don't want to just play through a ton of the podcast, but I'm curious, what do you all think? What do you all think of this response to the criticism? I think he handled it with grace. He kind of touched on it and basically solidified his viewpoint and his point behind how he approaches the show, how he approaches the diversity of opinions about the show. And I'm sure he probably would address at the same time the people who glorify him too much and, call him Jesus out in public. I believe there was a whole documentary they made about Jonathan and Jesus that probably addresses that. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think about his response here, addressing the criticism. He's not really saying anything bad about the criticism. All he's saying is that, like, our intention is not to be divisive. Our intention is to tell a dramatized historical show about the people, and that ultimately lead you to ask questions and, like, read the Bible, you know what I mean? And get people to think. That's the point of the show, which is like a really honest way of approaching it. And again, when I look at this, I don't really need an explanation because I can watch the show. I could see what they're doing, and I'm okay with it because I respect the amount of effort they're putting into staying true to the events that happen in the Bible without deleting stuff, without changing or twisting what the Bible or Jesus's teachings intended to try to motivate an interesting story that they want to tell. No, it's solid, right? And yes, they add some details into that are plausible and probable, but do not contradict anything that the Bible actually teaches. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about all of that, because I think it's very interesting.